Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined by my old partner in crime, Luke Thomas of MMA Fighting Serious Radio, and the new Luke Thomas is Pissed, seen on SB Nation's YouTube channel. Luke, how you doing?
I'm unshowered and tired, but you've roped me into this, so here I am.
Well, thank you. Thank you. The fans thank you. All dozen
Yeah,
of my
sure they
fans.
do.
We've got no viewers right now, so it's a big show. Luke, I hope you can handle the spotlight of the big time of the MMA Tete-A-Tete. We are here to talk about the UFC versus Bellator, maybe just a sprinkle of World Series of Fighting. First up, Saturday night, they went head-to-head. Scott Coker's first show with his fingerprints on it as the boss of Bellator. Tito Ortiz versus Stephan Bonnar on topped a fairly stacked card for Bellator, going up against UFC 180, a pay-per-view that had prelims on Fox Sports 1. Overall, how did you score the night? Who did you think came off better? And what do you expect the ratings to be like when we find out later today?
I always find it's impossible for me to answer those questions because I have such different priorities than what the rest of the fan base does. But just a couple of points. First of all, I know for a fact the ratings are coming out today, and I have been told, a little whatever you want to call this, I have been told that they're very good. So we'll see.
Very
And
good
then,
for Bellator, or
I don't know. I don't know about Fox Sports One. Maybe those are good too. I don't know.
but the
But certainly
spike
I've been told.
ratings?
Yeah, I've been told that the spike ratings are really good. So keep that, take that for what it's worth. Listen. Here's the following. I would say that, who won the night. It really depends on your perspective. But I guess people won in their own way. If you're the UFC, you could argue, look, we broke into a new market. We had a sellout crowd at Arena Ciudad, and a couple of guys were building there. Yair Rodriguez and other guys too. And so you could say, isn't that worthy of a win? If you're Bellator and the ratings are what they say they're going to be. You could say, look at the production value. Look at just how fun the show felt, and like the opening production elements. They did that "Come With Me Now" song, instead
Yep.
of "Face the Pain." And I'm not a big fan of that "Come With Me Now" song, but anything that's not what we're accustomed to, plus anything that we miss, that's what that Bellator show felt like. That the ramp and then the production things, they brought back what we were lacking, and then gave a twist to things we're not quite used to in a good way. So, listen. One's got 90% market share, one's got 10% market share. Obviously, the three top fights on the UFC card are the most relevant fights of the night. So, again, UFC could claim we had the most important fights. But I would just say that, boy, Bellator really makes use of what they have. That Joe Schilling Melvin Manhoff fight, could that have gone any better?
It was a beautiful fight. I mean, that was
Yeah.
just
And here's my point. It's like, is Joe Schilling even a top 100 middleweight? Arguably not. Arguably not. But what you get is that he's a top 10, top 5 kickboxer, and you know that under the circumstances, that's all that really matters here for the most part. And so you get this idea that like you're still watching quality without it actually being true MMA quality. It's just a really clever move by Scott Coker. So I think all parties can probably walk away and say they did well, but in the end, let's see what the ratings are on Spike. Let's see what they were on Fox Sports 1, and let's see what the pay-per-view is. It was good for Mexico. Was it good for the rest of North America? That's the question.
Yeah, and I think that Fabricio Verdum really saved their bacon by being so fluent in Spanish and such a likable coach on the show
Yeah.
that he won over the Mexican fans who I think in other circumstances, if he had been a hard heel or had not had good Spanish skills, I don't know if the Mexican fans would have bought the transition from Cain Velasquez versus Verdum to Verdum versus Mark Hunt. I mean, I think
Well,
that
imagine if it had been Hunt from the get-go, right?
yeah,
And then Velasquez gets injured. Like, Hunt could not have carried that the way Verdum did.
no,
And people don't understand this, Verdum for a while has been doing Spanish language commentary for the UFC and has been doing media tours. He did tours in Colombia. I know this because I sort of know all the guys in the scene down there, and they were posting pictures where he was going to all the major channels doing media down there. Like, he is something of a Latin media outside of Brazil darling already for the UFC, and that he was adopted by Mexico seems very hand in glove. Really fortuitous for them that he's likable, talented. Like, his career and his skill set came full circle at the right moment, and he spoke Spanish. Like, a very fortuitous turn of events for them in that way, given Velasquez was injured.
and also pretty ironic considering the way that they wiped their ass with Verdum a few years ago when Junior Dos Santos knocked him out, and they quickly trumped up a contract dispute and pushed him out of the UFC in a strike force at a point when they felt they didn't need him for their heavyweight division, and lo and behold, They need him now, and it seems like they're treating him well. So, that worked out. But I still have to say, Cain Velasquez, man, what a snake-bit cat. Like, he gets his big debut on Fox Sports on the first time UFC is on Fox in 2011. A lot of hype. They put a lot of money behind him. They toured all the Latino American TV outlets with him, pushed him as the first ever Mexican heavyweight champion. Didn't really say heavyweight champion of what, but it was true. It was the first time you had a Mexican champion of heavyweight in a major fight sport. And then he comes into the fight injured with a bad shoulder and a bad knee, gets knocked out in 64 seconds. He's never really recovered in the United States and Canada from that. And now, he gets all this hype in Mexico. The Ultimate Fighter Latin America is on, on Televisa in Mexico?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, the biggest network in Mexico, get a huge deal. The show's really high rated. The first fight, UFC 180, is an immediate sellout, and then he gets injured and can't fight. It's like, what is the deal with Cain Velasquez? Is this just fate or karma, or is this something he can turn around, or should the UFC move on and give up on Cain?
Well, I can't give up on him because he still has some value, but even that's waning. Early 30s heavyweight, like they go longer, but not with the kind of style that he has. It's all right if you're Mark Hunt, you're Roy Nelson, you're just waiting to land a bomb on Dave Herman at some point. It's not the same when you're a championship caliber and you're high cardio output all the time. So one of my live chats sent me a video. I love doing that chat for that reason. These guys come up with cool things to talk about. And it was a video of Cain Velasquez doing the most insane workout ever. But like insane to the point where it wasn't high intensity, it was absurd intensity. Like doing leg extensions of 300 pounds 100 times straight. This crazy thing. And then the strength and conditioning coach was like, I don't even know NFL players who I coach who could do this. And it's like, okay, that's great that he can do these feats of strength and endurance, but maybe that's contributing to some of the reasons why he's getting injured, because it's constantly this overly aggressive, high-intensity strength and conditioning, or the legendary sparring sessions with Daniel Cormier. Like, it can't be an accident that he gets injured like this. I think I talked to Mike Reardon about this. He didn't get injured like that in college, and that's wrestling season is super high intensity, So, granted, he's older now and your body breaks down more, but I really think that overtraining in MMA, you see all these guys with these, like Junior Dos Santos, who had that disease. I can't the name now. It starts with an R. But you're poisoning yourself with your own overtrained blood, basically. It's not, to me, it's not a coincidence at all.
Yeah, too much training. Before we turn to 2015, because both promotions announced their schedule, let's look at that Fox Sports 1 card head-to-head with Spike. And I think this is the thing that fans that are trying to handicap Bellator versus the UFC aren't really seeing clearly, is admittedly the UFC is out there in worlds Bellator's not even trying to get into. They're in the Latin American market, they're in Brazilian market, the Asian market.
Well, Bellator has that deal.
It's true, but they're not trying to put on live events in Mexico.
No.
But when it comes to just pure cable television, which is how a lot of people are watching the sports marketplace are going to watch it, because pay-per-view is seen as sort of a vestigial tale of a previous era, and cable TV remains the big thing. Fox Sports 1 versus Spike TV is kind of an apples-to-apples comparison, and I feel like the UFC 180 pay-per-view compared quite favorably to the Bellator 131 Spike TV event, but the Fox Sports 1 show did not at all. I mean, it had 3 fights from Ultimate Fighter Latin America, and then you had the Jessica I versus Leslie Smith fight. I mean, frankly, the takeaway, like Deadspin noticed, was Humberto Brown had poop in his drawers, and Leslie Smith's ear exploded. And Deadspin, having a bad history with the UFC, that's all they reported about the whole event was poop and exploding ears. Not exactly a good look.
But it's even more than that. And this is one thing I didn't. There actually won't be a Luke Thomas's Piss this week because I have so much stuff going on. I just don't have time to focus on it. But I'll save that probably for my live chat tomorrow. The things I actually am pissed about when it relates to MMA. It's unbelievable. MMA fans, they drive me. I mean, I love them, but they drive me crazy when I see, and media too. So I'm not going to even just single them out. Media too. Not all the media, some media, but people who will watch that prelim card was like, "This is great." You are a loser. You are a loser if you think that card was like amazing or something. I'm not saying you have to hate it like I did, but if you think that what you're looking at, if all you care about is action, just stop watching and stop commenting because you're ruining it for everybody else, right? Like, if you care about things like quality control, like, who goes to a single A baseball game, which is what most of that prelim card was. I mean, Leslie Smith and Jessica Guy are higher level women. Okay, fair enough. But who goes to a single A baseball game and is like, yo, these guys are hitting home runs left and right. This is just like seeing Derek Jeter at Yankee Stadium. No, it's not, actually. It's not the same at all. Action does not equal quality. They're not even remotely equivalent. And I saw the same people being like, yeah, that undercard was great, but man, did you see the Tito Bonner fight? That fight sucked. Tito Bonner did suck. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was good. It was also no worse than almost anything else on that prelim card. It was two old guys who were doing the best they could. That's a lot better than guys who barely know what they're doing. Barely know what they're doing.
There were some just feeble submission attempts attempted out there. But I did watch it with a buddy of mine who watched.
One quick point, because people were like, well, Bellator put on Tito in the main event. UFC at least had the decency to put those cards on the undercard. And that's true. But we're talking about two completely different universes. One has 90% market share, one barely has 10. The one with 10, number one, has to be very careful about their resources, which is why there's a main card between Joe Schilling and Melvin Manhoff in an MMA bout. And number two, it looks like the Tito Ortiz things might have worked if the ratings are, I'm told, they're very good. And the last thing is, if you want to call bad MMA, and you want to call Tito Ortiz bad MMA, that's fine. Call bad MMA. Just call whatever else you see that's also bad the same exact thing. In the end, there is a complete disconnect between the hardcore audience that watches Tito Ortiz and the rest of the casual audience. I saw it in Memphis. Dave Doyle said 10 minutes after that event was over in San Diego that fans were chanting, Tito, Tito. I don't personally care to see him. It doesn't interest me at all. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that other people don't. I think that what MMA fans suffered from so long was there was this aggressive PR campaign, but not a PR campaign. Dana White just hated the guy, and he slandered him every chance he got, and it worked. Like, it affected the hardcore fan base. And maybe Tito Ortiz is everything Dana White says he is. Maybe he is a dumbass. I don't know, you know. But what I also know is there's a whole lot of people who never got that message. And so that's why Scott Coker used him in the way that he did.
And I thought that was very shrewd. And the one thing that I think I watched the prelims. I watched the whole night with a buddy of mine who had been watching the Tough Latin America. He's fluent in Spanish. He loves the UFC. So he was really into those the prelim cards because he knew the guys. And I think that's the real difference. And that, to me, is the fundamental thing about fighting. I don't even think quality is that important. I think the important thing is narrative and familiarity. If you know guys that are fighting, you care. And if you don't know who they are and you don't know why they're fighting, you don't care. It doesn't, I mean, unless they do something just absolutely spectacular. And that doesn't have to be spectacular technique. Sometimes you have two great fighters and their technique cancels each other out. And sometimes you have two fighters like I and Smith, and what you get was this freak show gross out. And that's part of the game. That's you know.
Right, but here's my point. Bellator doesn't go out there and say, I mean, Bellator is trying to give you the best fights they can, understanding that they have to make some magic happen and do, you know, cut some corners. But UFC's out there, there's no argument. It's the top league. Their argument is this is where the best, you know, again, to a 90% clip, come to fight. If that's your argument, putting those guys there undercuts it, and it makes it a less enjoyable experience for me. When I turn on UFC broadcasts, I turn them on because I want to see Weidman fight Machida. I want to see, you know what I mean? I'm looking for Jose Aldo versus Chad. That's the kind of guy I'm looking for. When I turn on Bellator, I'm looking to be surprised. I'm looking to see, let's see where this train is headed. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's a little bit different of a calculation.
There was the Will Brooks-Michael Chandler fight, which I think those guys could walk into the UFC lightweight division tomorrow. I mean, obviously they need a training camp, but they could hang with anybody in the UFC lightweight division, I think, and acquit themselves respectably. But yeah, I mean, Bellator's looking to put on an entertainment package, and they're looking to build names, and the UFC, I think, is just relentlessly watering down their product. I mean, some people defending them will say, hey, they had to expand this much to meet their TV contracts in Brazil, in Mexico, you know, and in the United States with Fox. But at the same time they're doing that, they lost their contracts in Canada. Their numbers are eroding fast in the United States, and I don't think they're doing it. They're definitely not doing as well in Brazil as they were a couple years ago. So whether or not that's a sustainable plan, but the argument is that as this roster matures, as they fill it out, as, you know, young guys develop and as new fighters come up, they'll be able to fill this roster, that this is just growing pains. I don't think I buy that, because if you see something like one of the big developments yesterday was that Bellator signed this kid Pico. Was it Aaron Pico?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this kid is a 18-year-old, got an excellent wrestling background, FILA championships, also combat pancration background. This guy is an MMA blue chip, and he signs with Bellator. And that to me says everything about this is a changed environment. And I think that there's probably a lot of fighters in the UFC that are medium to high name value that are looking to see when their contract expires and are definitely going to be giving Scott Coker a call. I think it's a whole new dynamic.
Well, that argument about these guys will come in and fill in the gaps is just total nonsense. It doesn't work at all. Like the guys who fought on the prelim card at UFC 180, those Mexican guys, they could win UFC 1 pretty easily, right? They could. Or how about Augusto Montaño, who didn't even compete on the event? You know, the middleweight guy on the main card who fought Chris Headley.
Welterweight, yeah.
He could win UFC 1, and he's not UFC level. Okay, think
No.
about that. Here is the argument. This idea that fans are all of a sudden going to be interested in watching guys 40 to 50 ranked because they've gotten better is just insane. It's totally insane. Because the idea is this, again, for Bellator is going to make some magic and wave the wand and pull a nickel out of their ear and stuff like that, and that's fine. But again, we're talking about UFC, where the best fight the best. As the guys 40 to 50 and 40 to 30 and 30 to 20 and 20 to 10 and 10 to 1, they're all going to improve over time. So yes, the guys in the back end of the top 50, they're going to improve. So are the guys at the front. And here's my point. The Chris Weidman and the guys who are champions now, they're the best MMA fighters that have ever lived. It's true. They're better than anybody ever, the current crop. And yet MMA is having some issues, certainly domestically. So my point being is the premium side of the product will always matter. It will always and only matter. The top 10, top 15. Again, you're going to make some exceptions here for this guy, a blue chip prospect coming up. So it's not going to be a one-to-one. My point being is, as MMA has gotten better, so have fan expectations risen. So this idea that, well, all of a sudden these guys will just get better. Oh, the Mexican fighters will get better. Well, guess what? As they get better, so are the top guys going to get better. It's all going to happen at the same time. You're not all of a sudden just going to appreciate what is, relatively speaking, bad MMA. It's not bad MMA relative to 1993, but it sure is bad MMA relative to the best in 2014.
That's very true, and I think one thing that is going against the UFC, even Lorenzo Fertitta admitted that the mistake they'd made with expanding their offering so much was that they didn't differentiate between the levels of their offering. I mean, they treated a tough China card finale on Fight Pass basically the same way they treated a card in Brazil or the way they treated a card in North America, and you just get this blender of why there's no logic or sense to why guys are fighting on what cards. I mean, they try to get Asian guys fighting in Asia. They try to get Australian guys fighting in Australia. They do a great job of getting Brazilian guys fighting in Brazil. They obviously stack the Mexico card with Latin American fighters, but there aren't these clear markers. So there aren't clear boundaries protecting the Mexican fighters or the Chinese fighters that I think would make it a lot more fun. I think you could play a shell game with this quality level because it is so relative. It's hard, unless you're a really attuned connoisseur of MMA, it's really hard to tell when you see two guys who are at the same level, they can put on a great fight, even if they're not necessarily great fighters. And if you see a whole league of guys like that interacting and competing with each other, you can create the illusion, wow, if we have a champion that's head and shoulders over the rest of the guys in his league, then you bring in a real UFC champion, beat the brakes off the guy, once a year, and then people say, but he lost to the champ. He's still a great fighter. Instead of doing that, they just feed everybody into the sausage grinder, and everybody ends up getting, there's no way to build a regional scene. I mean, look what they've done in England. England before the UFC came over, you had a real feeling, the English fans had a real feeling like, hey, we've got some top-level MMA going, and they did have some talent. I mean, you had Lee Murray, who fought Anderson Silva to a near standstill back in 2004, 2005. You had Michael Bisping coming up. But then once they were exposed to this constant war of attrition with the UFC wrestle boxers and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, nobody thinks Britain has good fighters now, and I think that's held back the sport there.
Yeah, maybe. But again, my whole point is, like, I don't mind some international expansion. I think Latin America, if they can maintain their, um, listen, I think Latin America in the years going forward can be a big win for them. But it's just this global expansion idea that I find really untenable. You just can't plug all the holes. You got to rob Peter to pay Paul all the time. Um, and listen, there's a reason why there's no such thing as global brands in popular sports that are much more popular than UFC. I mean, Champions League. There were riots in the streets when people wanted to have actual games in Asia, or when they were talked about moving English Premier League one extra week and having it in the United States. People were like, no, I won't do it. I won't have it. And so these are the best in the world. Or English Premier League is the best single league and then champion, among the European leagues. So I just find the idea completely untenable. I don't mind them developing things, so I think they will find a guy like Conor McGregor. They will find a guy in Mexico who can actually compete with those guys. But that's just the point. It's that everyone's like, oh, you can just go to Ireland and put on Irish fighters and everyone will show up. For now, wait till their tastes evolve. Wait till fan expectations will always rise. When you go to a place that's underserved, yeah, they'll take what they can get, and they'll like seeing Paddy Houlihan do his thing, and that's fine. It should work for now. But if you think that's sustainable, if you think you can just go to New Zealand with Kiwi fighters forever, you are sadly mistaken. What they want to see is stars. What Americans want to see are stars. What Canadians want to see are stars. The top of the top. That's where it's interesting. MMA is one of these sports where you're either really good or you're just not. And the guys who are really good stand out so far in front of the rest of the pack, it's not even funny.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, like what you call Bellator's magic tricks. It's just they've got the room because they're stepping back. They're cutting down the number of shows. Bjorn Rebney was having shows every week. And Scott,
did you see that? Did you see the article from Dave Meltzer about it?
Yeah, I did.
The executives of Bellator, and they could be wrong. Maybe we have no idea what we're talking about. Probably don't, and that everyone else is wrong. But those executives over at Bellator were like, I mean, they didn't outright, say F you UFC. It sounded to me like they were taking shots. They were like, well, here was one quote. I don't know how you promote a card with 1 week in advance. I don't know how you do that. And we believe that less is more right now. That's what fans want. It was like, it was hearing everything we told we were wrong was actually what other executives in the MMA space, credentialed ones, agreed with. It was like a weird moment where I was like, okay, so I'm not I might be wrong, but I'm not alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the real thing, and that's why fans are excited about Scott Coker's Bellator and Viacom's. And I think the Viacom execs are on board and behind what Coker's doing. Supposedly Bjorn was pushed out, if anything, because he stuck to the tournament and he stuck to the weekly format so doggedly. But Rebney seemed determined to try to duplicate the UFC at a discount level, whereas Coker is determined to distinguish his product from the UFC. And I think he's succeeding brilliantly, and I think that's exciting. I mean, especially when your competitor is having troubles, why on earth would you want to follow the model that's leading to declining ratings and declining pay-per-view buys and declining fan interest? It just what Bjorn Rebney's approach never made any sense to me. I never could get jazzed about Bellator. The tournament concept sort of made sense. Like, yeah, tournaments can create stars, but not the way they were doing it. And if you look at the way Coker booked this main card for Bellator 131, I mean, you had King Mo against Joe Vetipo. This is a guy, King Mo, who was brought into Bellator to be a star. They had big talk about how he was going to be a star in TNA wrestling at the same time. He never even made the cut to do pro wrestling. He's been a major failure for Bellator, had a couple of losses, one spectacular loss to Emmanuel Newton. And they've given him a straight-up feeding frenzy. I mean, they fed him Joe Vetipo. This is a guy he can beat. Let's give him a tune-up fight. Let's get some more value out of King Mo, because this is a guy with personality that fans know that they've already invested in. I think that's the right way to handle him. I mean, the UFC would have booked him against some boring wrestle grinder, and or done what Bjorn Rebney did and book him against Emmanuel Newton again, and just waste all the value you've got. And I think that it's good to see them building King Mo up, and I think his athletic ability is probably on the downside with his knee injuries, but this is a cat that excites fans, that pisses fans off. Let's get some value out of him. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, well, listen, I hear what you're saying about UFC putting people into the sausage grinder, and I think there's a point where they do that incorrectly, but I also am more forgiving of them doing that. That's what you want to be in the UFC. You want to fight the best, fight the best. It's just, for me, I wish they would tailor their product to match how they use the sausage grinder, which is to say, we're going to make sure that this is there's a real strong degree of quality control here to make sure what you're really seeing is, generally speaking, a couple might sneak through, the best versus the best. Bellator just simply doesn't have that luxury. They can't do that. They have to use guys that people want to turn their head for negative or positive, and they got to give them matches that make sense. I think they might go the King Mo versus Tito Ortiz route if Tito agrees, and you might say it's a crazy fight, but I bet it'll put on good ratings, and I bet the fights under that, there'll be a couple of ones that you can say, okay, that's legit, and that's legit too, I think your point is correct. Like, there was an oversaturation problem, and everyone was pointing the fingers at the UFC, and rightly so. But under Bjorn Rebney's reign, he was contributing to the problem too.
Absolutely.
I mean, the insane amount of shows they were doing. He was just. I mean, I wouldn't say just as much of a part of the problem, but proportionally, he was just as much a part of the problem.
Yeah, he was defeating interest in the product. But then look at the rest of the card. You got Mike Richmond, up and coming. What was he? Bantamweight, beating Nam Phan, who's a name that's familiar to UFC fans, and just a perfect showcase fight. You take somebody like Nam Phan, that's a well-known fighter that had some really big fights on Spike TV. Great brawl with Leonard Garcia way back in the day, and you let somebody like Mike Richmond fight him when you know Richmond's got an excellent chance to win and look really good doing it, and voila, perfect outcome. I mean, now Richmond gets a little bit of rub from Nam Phan. I mean, it's not some huge deal. It's not like he beat, Larry Holmes or Mike Tyson or something, but he beat a name guy, and he did it very impressively, so now Mike Richmond's value is enhanced. I don't know what they can do with Nam Phan, but then again, who cares, Then you got the Schilling-Manhoff fight, great use of kickboxers, and I guarantee you that Coker will continue to protect Joe Schilling and book him in fights against guys who are mostly going to want to strike against him. Although don't lose some ground game. Yeah, that's what he should do. I mean, create that illusion, that aura, and make a promise to fans, we're going to deliver stand-up action, and the kind of action you want to see. And that fight certainly delivered. That, the first round, Manhoff looked really good, and then the second round knockout, that was a spectacular, spectacular knockout.
Schilling's a beast. I've seen him. I saw him beat Artem Levin in Ontario, California. I saw him at the Glory Last Man Standing tournament. He's an incredible guy, and listen, I've been to a lot of MMA and combat sports shows, and it's really rare you see somebody have an audience in the palm of his hand like Joe Schilling does in LA. So look for them to go there too and use Joe Schilling in LA. He has a huge following out there, and yeah, listen, I could probably be, I won't say that, but somebody pretty easy is going to beat Joe Schilling in jiu-jitsu. It's not going to be hard for them. But who cares? Let's use this guy in a way that makes sense, that interests us. If Glory's not going to use him, I'm all too happy for Bellator to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. Glory seems to be struggling. Joe Schilling's one of multiple guys that are complaining that their contract hasn't been renewed. So I'm happy to see Bellator sign those guys up. Then you had the Brooks Chandler fight. It was just an excellent fight. I didn't get to pay as much attention to it as I wanted to during the fight because I was watching the UFC card and flipping back and forth. Had two screens going at the same time. But when I rewatched it Sunday night, that was a really good fight. And I
still have not seen it yet.
It's a good fight. I wouldn't say it's like an absolute classic or anything, but I think Will Brooks made a strong case that he's a top tier fighter. I think Chandler's made a case that he's a top tier fighter, and Brooks is stylistically very well suited to beat Chandler, and also I think Chandler made some pretty bad tactical decisions and strategic decisions and just continuing to go for the takedown against a guy who wasn't having it. And then the knockout was just weird. Especially when you first saw it, because they were standing up and Brooks caught him with a punch to the temple that I didn't see. I just saw Chandler stand up, and then he acted like he was trying to stop the fight or he didn't want to fight. And it was sort of disturbing. Once they showed the replay and they showed the punch to the temple, it made more sense. But, Zane Simon on our post-fight show said that he thought Chandler might have been briefly blinded. Chandler admitted later he had no idea what was happening. He has no recollection of that moment. So kind of scary, but also kind of a classic fight moment, something that I can't recall seeing in MMA, where you have a guy just so disoriented that he looked like he was some poor guy in a bus, YouTube video on a bus or a subway that did not want to be in a fight and is just getting wailed on, which was disturbing, but also exciting and compelling, and something you wanted to watch again and figure out what the fuck happened. And that's what Dana White used to call an oh shit moment, which the UFC card had plenty of. I mean, I thought the Kevin Gastelum just demolishing Jake Ellenberger was pretty much an oh shit moment, because the oh shit was, holy crap, Kelvin Gastelum is a real no nonsense top 10, top 15 welterweight in the UFC and could be going places. I don't know that he's going to take a title, but this is somebody I am now very interested in seeing against the top tier of the UFC welterweight division. You had Ricardo Lamas finish Dennis Bermudez and show you what Killer Instinct is all about. That was an oh shit moment. And then the Verdum Hunt fight was full of oh shit moments. I mean, Hunt overperforming in the first round and then falling for that takedown attempt. Like when I first saw the fight, I was like, what in the fuck was Hunt ducking down for? But when you rewatch it, then you see, oh, well, just seconds before, Fabricio made a really half-ass single leg attempt, and Hunt, sprawled perfectly and stopped it. So Fabricio was just setting up the knee with that takedown attempt, and it worked beautifully and made for a beautiful postcard ending to that fight. So there were plenty of oh shit moments on the 180 card. It's just that they were all stacked at the end of the pay-per-view after you've gone through hours of pretty mediocre stuff on Fox Sports 1. And then the timing of it was perfect for Bellator because the UFC card finished quickly just in time for everybody to tune over to Bonner versus Ortiz. Now, last time they had an event head-to-head, it seemed like there wasn't a lot of channel switching back and forth. But I'll be very curious to see if there was. And it might not matter because Spike has just so much more muscle in this space than Fox Sports 1 that if they keep going up against Fox Sports 1 with cards like Ortiz versus Bonner, things that are compelling, they could just win straight up. And another thing I really liked that was totally missing from the Bjorn Rebney era in Bellator and has been missing from the UFC is storytelling and narrative. Bellator took the time out in the broadcast to give us a recap of previous fights so that you got some highlights of the Chandler Brooks fight before, you got some of the narrative of Ortiz and Bonner, and you knew what, it set the stakes, it set the table, and then they took the time to set up their next card. You got Paul Daly versus Douglas Lima. You got Bobby Lashley versus James Thompson, which is a laughable matchup, and yet seeing them on that stage in the company of guys like Daly and Lima and Emmanuel Newton and Liam McGarry, which is a fight I'm very interested in. I think Liam McGarry has some star potential. Lashley and Thompson, it seemed like an old Pride card, when they used to book Thompson against Don Fry or Don Fry against, random Japanese guy. It creates some excitement, and the overall package is more than the sum of its parts, and that, to me, is what skillful promotion is all about.
Yeah, for sure. And one quick point to add to all of this is that, it's not just that Spike is free and that pay-per-view is, not. And that the timing worked out fortuitously for Spike, which may add things that they can't match in the future. I mean, we'll see how everything goes. But I just feel like with the schedule coming out, 13 pay-per-views in 2015, right? 13. It's like they didn't think they needed to scale back at all. Okay, well, I mean, the whole pretense of that schedule is that if nothing goes wrong, we'll probably be okay. That's what that means. Which I hope. Listen, I'm not asking for injuries. I hope they never ever happen again. But just realistically speaking, you got a burn rate there you have to account for, which this schedule does not. If they have a main event, and again, I'm not wishing this on UFC, but I'm just sort of saying if it happens, we have a situation like you do where Dillashaw is fighting Joe Soto, and there's a Bellator card with let's say Rampage on it that same night, and it's free. That's going to be really interesting to me because Dave Meltzer was noting one thing. He was saying that there was a massive amount of searches for Bellator 120, which was the pay-per-view. But there are always more searches for pay-per-view because it's behind a paywall.
Yeah.
If it's free, you can just turn the channel. You don't need to search. And that to me is not indicative of anything. I just think it's so smart for Scott Coker to be like, you know what? We're just we're gonna invest in free content on a major channel. We're going to double down on this brand that we know can still deliver ratings to the right kind of demo. I just feel like I'm glad someone, like I want UFC should do what they want and compete on their vision. And, they may have great things, may have bad things, but it's their vision. I want someone else to have a different vision. And there may be good things about that vision and bad things about that vision, but it's their vision, and it's an alternative to each other. And in that sense, I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great for fans. It's great for fighters, especially who can bid for their services. But yeah, when you look, another thing that jumps out to me, comparing the schedule Bellator's announced versus the schedule that UFC announced yesterday. For one thing, the ambition of the UFC thing is just insane. They've laid out the entire year's calendar, whereas Bellator laid out a quarter. They laid out their plan for January. Also, Bellator made a very, very clear distinction. They're going to have smaller cards on Fridays once a month, and then they're going to build up to once a quarter to a big fight night on Saturday. That's something fans can keep up with. You want to keep up with Bellator? Tune to Spike. Tune to Spike on Fridays. once a month and tune to Spike on Saturday once a quarter. And every time you tune in on Friday, they're going to be reminding you about that big fight that's coming up on Saturday at the end of the quarter. And they're going to be building that and telling the story. Whereas the UFC schedule, it's like Saturday, Sunday, Saturday, 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 Sunday, Saturday, 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 a shit ton of Saturdays, then a Friday in May, then 2 Saturdays, 2 more Saturdays, like 6 Saturdays in July. Then a Sunday in July. Then
Well,
a
hold on.
Wednesday.
Jose, in fairness to the UFC, the issue is not that they're hard to find. I mean, yeah, sometimes they're on Fox Sports 2 and Fox Sports 1, but
Sometimes
they
on
still do.
FX.
All right, that's fine, but that's pretty rare, and they do really good numbers for those networks. That to me
Not
is
on FX, but on Fox Sports.
What's interesting to me is that the difference in Spike is that it's just one place. It's one place all the time. All of our shows will be here. Now, most will be on Fridays. Some might be on Saturdays. The Saturday ones will be heavily invested in. I watch other Spike shows. Believe it or not, I watch Ink Master. They heavily promote Bellator on that show. It's a very high-rated show for them. But it's just all here. It's all right here. It's not necessarily the same as doing something else. But I don't think the issue with UFC fans is that they can't find the content or they're not sure where it is. I think the issue is the content all the time interesting to them. That to me is the issue.
Well, it's not just that it's all the time. I do think there's an issue of knowing when to find it, because if you fall behind with the UFC and you're not watching Fox Sports on the regular, which no one is. I mean, Fox Sports 1, they're beginning to have some sports content that's getting more attention, but there's not a built-in audience like there is for Spike TV. And what there is sports fans who, the data shows that's really not the MMA audience. But I just think that it's a bit random. The thing with Bellator is their Friday night shows, you've been told these are our monthly shows. These aren't our tentpole shows. The big deal is on Saturday. With the UFC, some of these Saturday shows presumably are going to be on Fox, and some of them are going to be on FS1, and then maybe they'll be on FS2, depending on the vagaries of the schedule and the sporting schedule and everything else. I just don't think there's any significance to it. Like, how is a fan supposed to know what it means that a card is on a Wednesday or that a card is on a Sunday? I mean, used to there would be a fight night, a finale, or they would have a fight night to lead into the first episode of The Ultimate Fighter, and so that made sense. Okay, I know why this fight's on a Wednesday, but I just think this random shooting around from day to day, I think it does confuse fans. And I think that hardcore fans know where to find the UFC, but once you fall out of that hardcore orbit and you're not paying attention all the time, it makes it a lot harder to get back into it. And I think if they've got a competitor that's bringing you names that you remember, like Tito Ortiz and Rampage Jackson, that's on the channel where you learned to watch UFC on Spike, I think that's a big advantage that Bellator has. And I think it's something that it would behoove the UFC to pay more attention to that.
I just think the issue is, it's hard to tell people about shows every week. Oh, here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. I disagree a little bit that they're hard to find. But I don't know who's right.
Yeah, but I mean, like 5 fights in June, 6 fight cards in July.
That's to me that's the problem. Is like just the number of shows. They might all be on Fox Sports 1, but. How do you follow 6? How could you possibly be invested in 6 shows unless you're the hardest of the hardcore?
Yeah, it's just the one good thing I see is I don't see multiple fights on the same day. I do see a couple of fights that are the next day, which leads me to believe I'm suspicious they might be planning another one of these Friday nights in Australia, Saturday night in Brazil kind of things, which I don't think worked out very well. But at least they're getting away from the two, from the European card and the American card in the same day. But also that makes me suspicious if they haven't completely collapsed in Asia, because one of the reasons for the 2 fights in one day was because of the Asian cards that take place very early in the morning in North America. And they lost their UFC China director. Apparently a lot of the office staff, they fired him, Fisher, but a lot of the staff apparently walked out, and they haven't found partners. They've got a great deal in Japan where it's basically a paid-for event, that they're not risking any money to put on an event once a year in Japan. They don't have that same luxury in Macau. They still have never managed to put on an event in the Philippines. They still haven't managed to put on an event in South Korea. And it makes me wonder if they're going to be retreating from the Asia market, or if they're just going to do Japan once a year and do Australia a couple times a year and call that their Asian effort. Like, you think they're going to run tail from Asia, or do you think they're going to keep throwing fights at it?
I don't know, but here's what I know. I am running out of time.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
we'll have to table that conversation to a future one. I'll come back on this, but I'm drowning in labor
All
at the
right, all
moment.
right. Well, we will let you go, Luke, and thank you for doing the show. And as always, follow Luke Thomas at SBN. Is it SBN Luke Thomas on Twitter?
Yeah, it's the worst Twitter name ever, short of Fred Smoot, which is Fred F Smoot 21 Sean T. I actually know that, but yes, short of Fred Smoot having the worst Twitter handle, I do.
I see. And I'm at Kid Nate. You can read Luke Thomas at MMAfighting.com. You can also hear him on SiriusXM Radio on Mondays. You can look out for Luke Thomas's Piss. That'll be happening on Thursdays. Not this Thursday, but he'll be back presumably after Thanksgiving for some more of that. I had 2 episodes of that so far. And read me on BloodyElbow.com. And adios, MMA aficionados. Thanks, everybody.